The day a spoiled executive snapped his fingers in my face and called me the IT girl. He thought he was embarrassing a random employee. 3 days later, his company couldn't access its offices. Their servers were overheating, investors were furious, and the premium infrastructure keeping his business alive belonged to his biggest competitor. The best part? I never argued with him. I simply accepted being fired. My name is Victoria Hayes, and for nearly 20 years I've worked in commercial infrastructure management. Most people don't understand what that means, and honestly, that's the point. When my job is done correctly, nobody notices it. They notice the beautiful offices, the fast internet, the cool air, the secure doors, and the elevators that arrive instantly. They never think about the systems behind those conveniences, or the people responsible for keeping them running. That misunderstanding destroyed one man's career. It started on a Thursday afternoon inside Skyline Center, one of the most prestigious office towers in the city. I was reviewing infrastructure renewal documents for a major technology company, occupying the entire 37th floor. The contract sitting in front of me represented months of negotiations and millions of dollars in services. While studying the paperwork, I heard fingers snap beside my head. "Hey, IT girl." I ignored it. The snapping came again. "I know you can hear me." I looked up and saw Brandon Cole standing beside my table. Brandon was 26 years old, wore expensive clothes, carried himself like royalty, and held a leadership title he had earned mainly because his father was a senior executive in the company. Behind him, several managers were staring at a frozen investor presentation. "Our internet is lagging," Brandon said. "We're pitching investors in a few minutes. Fix it." For a moment, I thought he was joking. I was wearing a business suit, surrounded by contracts, and clearly working on something important. "I'm not part of your IT department," I replied calmly. He frowned. "Then what are you doing here?" "Reviewing your infrastructure renewal." He rolled his eyes. "Whatever. Go reboot something." I closed the folder in front of me. "If you're having technical problems, you'll need to submit a support request." Several nearby employees stopped working and started watching. Brandon laughed. "I don't submit tickets. I tell people to do their jobs." I remained calm. "Then you'll need to contact your support team." That answer pushed him over the edge. He slammed his hand onto the table so hard my coffee cup shook. The entire office fell silent. "I'm tired of useless support staff," he shouted. "My company spends millions here and you can't even fix the internet." Then he pointed toward the door. "Get out." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then he delivered the sentence that would ruin his entire week. "You're fired." I stared at him, not because I was upset, because I was fascinated. Brandon genuinely believed he had the authority to fire me. The woman responsible for negotiating the infrastructure agreement that supplied his company with premium bandwidth, dedicated cooling systems, security integrations, and dozens of other services. I stood slowly. "Just to clarify," I asked, "you're terminating our professional relationship?" "Absolutely." I nodded. "Understood." I packed my laptop, gathered my documents, and walked away without another word. The unsigned renewal agreement remained on the table. As the elevator doors closed, I saw Brandon smiling while his colleagues congratulated him. He thought he had won. He had no idea what he had just done. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a coffee shop across the street when the building manager arrived upstairs, carrying champagne and final paperwork for the signing ceremony. The first thing he asked was, "Where's Victoria?" Brandon casually replied, "I fired her." The building manager reportedly went pale. "You did what?" "I fired her." The manager stared at him in disbelief. "Brandon, Victoria isn't technical support." Brandon shrugged. "Whatever she is, she's gone." The manager pointed at the unsigned contract. She owns the infrastructure agreements. The room froze. She controls your premium internet. Another finger. Your server cooling. Another. Your security systems. Then he looked Brandon directly in the eye. She controls half the services keeping this floor operational. Brandon opened the contract and saw my name across the top. That's when panic began. Meanwhile, I returned to my office in the building's operations center. Unlike the luxurious executive suites upstairs, my office was filled with monitors, control systems, and infrastructure dashboards. This was where the real power lived. I wasn't angry. I was simply following the contract. Brandon had made it clear he didn't want my services. So I began rolling back privileges that depended on the renewal agreement. Priority elevator access disappeared. Freight elevator authorizations vanished. Premium network prioritization expired. Most importantly, dedicated server cooling reverted to standard building service. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was removing services that no longer had a valid agreement. Within hours, support tickets started flooding in. Slow internet. Access issues. System failures. Overheating equipment. Then Brandon emailed me. The message contained no apology. Only another demand. Need this fixed immediately. I archived the email without responding. That evening, I had dinner with Richard Lawson, CEO of Horizon Technologies. Horizon happened to be Brandon's biggest competitor. For years, they had wanted additional infrastructure capacity, but couldn't get it because Brandon's company occupied most of it. Not anymore. I offered Richard everything Brandon had just abandoned. Premium bandwidth, dedicated cooling, expansion capacity. He signed a 5-year contract before dessert arrived. By the end of dinner, Brandon's infrastructure belonged to his competitor. The next morning, Horizon's systems were operating perfectly while Brandon's office continued falling apart. Server temperatures climbed. Video calls froze. Employees complained. Investors grew frustrated. By Friday afternoon, portable fans were running throughout the office, as staff struggled to keep equipment functioning. The situation became even worse over the weekend. Without proper network updates, security credentials began expiring. Monday morning arrived. I walked into the lobby carrying coffee and found dozens of Brandon's employees standing outside security gates. Their access cards no longer worked. Badges flashed red. People were angry. Confused. Frustrated. Brandon saw me. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. Wrinkled clothes. No confidence left. You did this, he said. I remained calm. The security system requires network validation. Please fix it. That word caught my attention. Please. It was the first sign of humility I'd seen from him. I have a meeting at 9, I replied. That meeting included Brandon, his father, several executives, and their attorney. They apologized. They offered money. They begged for a solution. Then they learned the truth. The infrastructure agreement was gone. The capacity had already been sold. Legally. Permanently. To Horizon Technologies. Brandon's father was furious. You sold our infrastructure to a competitor. I shook my head. I sold available infrastructure to a client who signed a contract. Nobody had a response because they knew I was right. Within months, Brandon's company broke its lease and relocated. The financial penalties cost them millions. Horizon eventually expanded into the space and became one of the building's best tenants. 6 months later, I was standing in the same conference room overlooking the city skyline when Richard mentioned that his nephew was starting an internship. I gave him one piece of advice, Richard said. What was it? I asked. He smiled. I told him the first person he should introduce himself to in this building is you. I laughed. Because the real lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. People often assume power belongs to the loudest voice in the room, the biggest office, or the most impressive title. But real power usually works quietly behind the scenes. Most people never notice it until it's gone. And somewhere out there, Brandon is probably still learning that lesson while waiting for a very large file to download over a very slow internet connection.